They say some moments heal you until they break you. I used to believe that helping people, really helping them, was the noblest thing you could do. That if your heart was in the right place, everything else would follow. That empathy couldn't lead you wrong. But I've learned something since then. Sometimes the person you're saving ends up saving a part of you didn't even know was dying. And sometimes, that saving feels a lot like breaking. It's been 3 years since I met him. 3 years since I held a man's chart in one hand and slowly started losing pieces of myself with the other. 3 years since a quiet thank you turned into late-night texts and a hospital room turned into something much harder to walk away from. But I want to be clear, this didn't start with lust, or temptation, or some twisted fantasy. It started with loneliness. It started with me showing up for a man who looked like the world had chewed him up and left him hollow. It started with a soft conversation under cold fluorescent lights, and ended with a silence so loud it still rings in my ears. I know how this sounds. And maybe you're already judging me. That's okay. I've judged myself too. But if you've ever been tired, if you've ever gone home to an empty apartment and cried in the shower because no one noticed you today, if you've ever craved a voice at 2 a.m. just to say, hey, I'm glad you're still here, then maybe, just maybe, you'll understand how I got here. Because I didn't go looking for him. He wasn't a fantasy or an escape. He was real, raw, broken in all the ways I was. And for a moment, it felt like fate. Until it didn't. And now, here I am, 3 years later. Still wondering when kindness crossed the line into something else. Still replaying every second like a movie I wish I could pause before the ending. So, if you're still here, if something in your gut is telling you to keep listening, then maybe you know what it's like to blur the line between duty and desire. To hold a hand a second too long. To get too close to the very thing you're supposed to heal. Because this isn't just a story about infidelity. It's a story about being human. About vulnerability and connection, and how sometimes the people we try to save end up taking us somewhere we never meant to go. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where we expose the truths people whisper only in the dark. Don't miss what comes next. I was 36. A nurse. Divorced. Worn down in ways I didn't have the words for. My shifts stretched into nights, then blurred into mornings. Not because they asked me to stay late, but because I had nowhere else to be. The apartment I went home to echoed when I closed the door. And that echo? It started sounding a lot like loneliness. The hospital felt more like home than my own place did. Quiet halls. The hum of machines. Fluorescent lights that flickered like they were just as tired as me. Some nights, I'd walk past the break room mirror and barely recognize myself. Dark circles, hair pulled back with no care, eyes that looked like they'd forgotten how to shine. And no one noticed. Not the other nurses. Not the doctors. Not even the patients. I was just there, invisible. Until Elijah. He came in on a rainy Thursday. Post-surgery complication. Nothing dramatic, just enough to keep him overnight. He was 39. Clean-shaven. More pain like it was something he'd gotten used to. But what stood out wasn't his condition. It was how he looked at everything like he was reading the room, weighing the silence. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for much. Just watched. When I checked his vitals, he thanked me like he meant it. When I brought his meds, he smiled, not the polite kind, but the kind that reached his eyes. There was something about him. Not loud, not flirtatious. Just calm, present. A stillness I hadn't felt in a long time. His voice was low, a little hoarse, like it had more stories in it than words. When he spoke, he didn't rush. And when he asked me how my night was going, he waited for the answer. That first night, I lingered. Just a little longer than necessary. I told myself he might need something else. But really, I needed something. A pause. A moment. A space where I didn't feel so unseen. My coworkers passed me in the hallway like I was air. My ex-husband had already posted engagement pictures with someone else. And me? I hadn't been really touched in over a year. There's a cold that lives inside you when you go untouched for that long. It's not just physical. It's deeper. Like your body starts to believe it's not worthy of warmth. That night, Elijah asked me what book I was reading. I lied and said something impressive. He nodded and said, "That fits you." And I believed him, even though it wasn't true. I started checking on him more often, bringing water when I knew he still had some, asking if the blankets were warm enough, even though he never complained, staying an extra minute, then 2, then 3. In the back of my mind, something whispered, "This is nothing." But something deeper, something buried under exhaustion and silence, was whispering back, "This is everything." And every time I walked into that cold, sterile room, it felt a little less cold, and I felt a little more alive. It was just after midnight when the monitors in Elijah's room started beeping, soft, steady, nothing dramatic, but enough to pull me out of my routine. His blood pressure had dipped. He looked pale, more than usual. Eyes half closed, lips dry. I called the attending, adjusted the fluids, stayed close. The other nurses moved on. I didn't. I sat with him. Not because I had to, but because I couldn't bring myself to walk away. The room was quiet except for the steady tick of the 4 and the soft buzz of distant hallway chatter. I checked his pulse again, even though it was stabilizing. I told myself I was being thorough, but I just didn't want to leave. His eyes fluttered open. He looked at me, really looked. Then, out of nowhere, he whispered, "She left me during chemo." I froze. He didn't say it with bitterness. He said it like someone saying the weather out loud, calm, resigned, already soaked. I sat back down. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. He continued, "She said she couldn't do it." That watching me fall apart was worse than staying. I didn't know what to say. So I just said, "I'm sorry." And then he asked me if I'd ever felt abandoned in a moment when I needed someone most. I nodded. And just like that, the air between us shifted. I told him my ex had moved out 6 days after our 7th anniversary. Said he felt numb, that he hadn't felt married in months. I remember laughing when I said it, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh, I'd cry. Elijah didn't ask for details. He just said, "You didn't deserve that." I don't know what happened next, exactly. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was reflex. Maybe it was something I'd been holding in for too long. But I reached out and placed my hand over his. Not the way nurses do. Not the way I was trained to. Softer. Slower. And when he didn't pull away, I didn't either. I should have moved. I should have said something, anything, to reset the moment. But instead, we just sat there. 2 strangers. 2 stories. 2 hearts trying to feel something that wasn't pain. Eventually, I stood, cleared my throat, said I'd be back to check in before morning rounds. He thanked me, said my presence made the night feel shorter. I didn't sleep when I got home. I kept replaying the way his fingers twitched under mine, the way his eyes softened when I said nothing at all, the way silence, for once, didn't feel empty. The next day, before my shift ended, I left a note on his tray. Just 1 line. "Hope you rest better tonight." He folded it, tucked it under his pillow, said nothing, but the way he looked at me said more than I was ready to hear. Looking back, I told myself I was offering comfort, but the truth is, I was craving it. I told myself it was just kindness. That what happened that night, the hand-holding, the silence, the note, it was part of the job. Nurses carry pain for people. We make the unbearable a little easier. That's what I was doing. At least, that's what I told myself. But then the shifts started to feel different. I started to feel different. I'd wake up early just to choose which scrub top looked softer, more fitted. I started wearing lip balm again. The tinted one I hadn't touched since the divorce. The one I used to wear when I wanted to feel seen. I was anticipating work in a way I hadn't in years. Not for the patients. Not for the routine. But for him, Elijah's room became a stop I looked forward to. The check-ins got longer. I started asking about his sleep, then his thoughts, then his memories. He answered in fragments, quiet, heavy things that made the air between us dense. I listened harder than I needed to. I smiled more than I should have. And when I wasn't with him, I was thinking about him. I'd lie in bed after a long shift, staring at the ceiling, wondering what he was doing. Wondering if he had the note under his pillow still. Wondering if he was thinking about me, too. Then I'd reach for my phone and scroll. Scroll past pictures of my ex-husband and his new fiancée in Greece. Smiling, tanned, arms around each other like nothing had ever broken. I'd stare at their photos longer than I should. Not out of jealousy, but out of disbelief. How did he move on so easily while I still felt like pieces of me were scattered across hospital beds and quiet rooms? Then I'd turn off the phone, turn onto my side, and wonder if it was possible to miss something I never really had. By the third day, I stopped pretending. I knew it was personal, not professional, not anymore. Because the way my heart jumped when I saw Elijah's name on the chart, that wasn't empathy. The way I paused outside his door, smoothed my hair, and counted to 3 before entering, that wasn't protocol. That was something else. Something I didn't want to name. I told myself it was harmless. He was a patient. This was temporary. Boundaries weren't being crossed, they were just being leaned on. But the line between right and wrong, it was starting to blur. And I didn't know if I was walking it or erasing it. That night, during my last round, I stepped into his room. He was sitting up, reading something. He looked at me and smiled, not with politeness, with warmth. Then, soft and steady, he said, "You look beautiful tonight." And just like that, my breath caught, my heart paused, and everything I'd been denying stopped hiding. He was discharged on a Tuesday afternoon. I didn't get to walk him out. I was caught up in another patient's chart. But when I returned to his room, it was empty. The bed was stripped, the monitor off. The air still carried his scent, clean soap, and something faintly woodsy. And on the tray table, a small folded card. No envelope. Just my name on the front, written in handwriting I already recognized. Inside, a simple note. "Thank you for making the hardest week of my life feel a little less lonely." And below that, a number. No name. Just 7 digits and a city code. Like an invitation wrapped in silence. I stared at it for a long time. My fingers trembled as I folded it shut. Then, without thinking, I walked to the nearest trash bin and dropped it in. But I didn't walk away. I stood there, still, heart racing, stomach turning. My hand hovered over the edge of the bin, and then I reached in and took it back out. I didn't look at it again that night. I tucked it into the back of my journal and went to bed with a storm in my chest. Days passed. I told myself I wouldn't reach out, that it was over, that what happened was just a moment, suspended in hospital walls, never meant to exist outside them. But on the 4th night, I broke. I typed, just checking in. "How are you feeling?" Simple, neutral, professional even. He replied within minutes. "Better, but emptier." I stared at the screen, then typed, "It's strange not seeing you here." He said, "You got used to me?" I replied, "More than I should have." And, just like that, it began. The messages turned into longer paragraphs. The paragraphs became evening check-ins. Then came the phone calls. At first, they were short, awkward, like 2 people trying to figure out if they were still tethered to something real. But then they started stretching into midnight. We'd talk about everything. Music, books, childhood memories. He told me he wrote poetry once. I told him I used to dance alone in my kitchen when I couldn't sleep. He read me a poem one night. His voice low, almost shy. I closed my eyes and listened like it was a lullaby. And when he finished, there was a silence so full, it felt like music. He said, "You're the first person who's really seen me in months." And without thinking, I whispered back, "You're the first person who's made me feel anything in years." The line went quiet after that. Not uncomfortable, just full, like both of us had said something we couldn't unsay. We didn't talk every day. Sometimes a full 48 hours would pass. But when my phone lit up with his name, my heart always skipped. I knew I was crossing something. Maybe not a rule, but a promise. A promise I made to myself to keep the past behind me, to heal the right way. But what happens when healing finds you in the wrong form? One Thursday night, I was curled up on my couch, half asleep with a blanket over my legs and a tea gone cold beside me. I hadn't heard from him in 2 days, and then came a knock at the door. 3 soft taps. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I looked through the peephole, it was him, Elijah, standing there, hands in his pockets, looking like the question I hadn't dared ask out loud. And suddenly, every line I had drawn in my head was gone. I opened the door slowly. There he was, Elijah. Hair still damp from the rain. A plastic bag in one hand. Thai food. I could smell the ginger and lemongrass before he said a word. He didn't speak right away. Just gave me this half smile, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. I wasn't sure either. But I stepped aside, and he walked in. I closed the door behind him, and for a moment, it felt like I'd locked the world out. He handed me the bag and shrugged. "I thought you might not have eaten yet." I nodded. He sat down on the edge of the couch. I moved slowly, my body tense, everything inside me tangled up in questions I didn't know how to ask. We ate on the coffee table, knees close but not touching. Talked about nothing at first, traffic, weather, the taste of the noodles. But there was something heavy between us. Something humming beneath every glance, every pause. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and, just like that, darkness. I reached for my phone, turned on the flashlight, then remembered the drawer. Candles. I lit 3. The room softened instantly, shadows dancing on the walls, golden warmth washing over everything. The kind of light that makes it harder to lie to yourself. I turned on the speaker. Soft jazz. The kind with no words, just aching. We didn't speak for a while. Just listened. Chewed slowly. Sipped tea. Breathed. Then he reached out and touched my wrist. I didn't move. His thumb brushed the inside of it, slow, careful, like he was reading a page he wasn't sure he had permission to open. Then his hand moved to my face. Fingertips to cheek. Palm to jaw. Eyes searching mine like a question he didn't dare say out loud. I should have pulled back. Instead, I leaned in. His lips met mine, soft at first, unsure, like both of us were waiting for the other to regret it. I didn't. He didn't. And something broke open inside me. Years of being untouched, unnoticed, unseen. And now this. This man. This moment. I led him to the couch. I don't remember how the food was pushed aside, or how my body knew where to go. I just remember the feeling. Skin on skin. Breath on breath. Every inch of space between us disappearing. His hands moved like he was afraid I'd vanish. Mine shook. Not from fear. From finally feeling alive. And somewhere in the middle of it all, this voice inside me whispered, I was drowning in silence for so long. Was this oxygen, or was it fire? I didn't know. I didn't care. I just needed to feel something that didn't ache. And he gave it to me. When it was over, I lay there, head on his chest, blanket over both of us, his arm wrapped tight around me like a promise no one said out loud. I didn't speak. But tears slid down my cheeks, quiet, careful tears that didn't ask for attention. He didn't say a word, just pulled me closer. And in that stillness, in that broken, beautiful stillness, I realized I wasn't sure whether I had just found something or lost something I'd never get back. I didn't answer his text the next day, or the one after that. I needed space, to breathe, to think, to figure out what I had just done and what it meant. But guilt doesn't give you room to think. It climbs into your chest and takes up all the air. At work, I was off rhythm. I forgot vitals, misfiled labs, spilled coffee on a chart. Every time someone said my name, I jumped. Every time a phone vibrated, I froze. The nurse's station buzzed louder than usual. Not with voices, but with eyes. And then I heard it, two techs whispering near the supply closet. Wasn't she Elijah's nurse? I didn't wait to hear the rest. Didn't have to. It was already in my blood now, shame. Hot, heavy, loud. I walked into the break room and sat in the corner, shaking. Pulled out my phone, opened Elijah's profile. He'd posted a photo that morning, just a blurry shot of trees and sunlight, captioned, "Some days feel lighter." But it was the comments that stopped me cold. One in particular. A woman. "Glad you're healing. See you soon, love." I stared at it. Read it once. Then again. Then again. I tried to tell myself it was a friend. A sister. Someone from a support group. But my gut knew. Before my brain caught up, my heart already knew. I opened our chat. My fingers hovered, then moved on their own. Who is she? He read it almost instantly. 3 dots. Then none. A full minute passed. Then my wife. We're trying to reconcile. I dropped the phone. It hit the couch cushion, soft and soundless. Unlike the explosion inside me, my thoughts spun. I replayed every second on that couch. Every touch. Every whisper. Every lie by omission. He never said he was single. He never said he wasn't. And I never asked. I didn't want the truth then. But now it burned. I wasn't the light in his darkness. I was just the moment between his storms. I sat in silence for hours. No music. No TV. Just the hum of the fridge and the sound of my own heart breaking in slow, sharp pieces. I kept asking myself the same question over and over. Was I just a distraction? A mistake wrapped in kindness? Or was I the one who used him? Because it's easy to call it a moment. Easy to label it a lapse. But it wasn't just that. It was something deeper. Something harder to explain. Something born from two people too bruised to know where healing ended and hunger began. I opened my drawer and pulled out the small slip of paper. The note I had written without thinking. "Hope you rest better tonight." It looked so harmless. So innocent. Just a nurse offering comfort. But holding it now, it felt different. That wasn't a note. It was an open door. One I had walked through with my eyes half closed and my heart wide open. My voice shook when I whispered the question I had buried for days. What if I was never healing him, just feeding my emptiness? I looked around my apartment. Same walls. Same photos. Same bed I'd slept in alone since the divorce. Only now, it felt even emptier. Because for a moment, it hadn't been. And that was the hardest part. I picked up my phone and scrolled through old shifts on my calendar. Names, rotations, charts. I hovered over the resign email template more than once. What was I doing? Had I betrayed my profession? My vows? Myself? I thought about how easy it was to blur the line. How quickly care became craving. How deeply I'd convinced myself that loneliness justified the crossing. And then I made a quiet vow to myself, one I whispered more than once, like a prayer I wasn't sure anyone was listening to. I will never mistake attention for affection again. Because what I wanted wasn't love. It was to matter. To be seen. And in chasing that feeling, I lost something I may never get back. Have you ever helped someone only to realize you were the one bleeding on the inside? Have you ever given your time, your warmth, your softness, only to walk away emptier than before? Have you ever touched a hand thinking you were offering strength when all you really wanted was to be held? Because I don't know anymore if what I did was wrong. Or if it was just human. Raw. Messy. Desperate. Real. I didn't mean to cross a line. I meant to survive. But survival doesn't always look noble, does it? Sometimes it looks like longing. Sometimes it looks like need dressed up as compassion. Sometimes it looks like this. So now I ask you, was I wrong? Or was I just trying to feel again, in a world that forgot I could? Tell me your truths in the comments. Your heartbreaks, your regrets, your silences. I read every single one. No judgment, just honesty. If this story echoed something buried deep in you, subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold, where silence turns into stories too heavy to carry alone. Tap the bell. The next one might echo something you've never dared say aloud. Some betrayals don't wear sharp edges. They don't scream. They don't shatter glass or tear fabric. They come quietly, wrapped in warmth, in long conversations and soft goodnights, in hands that linger and eyes that hold you just a second too long. They come disguised as help, as healing, as the thing you thought you'd never feel again. But not every hand should be held, and not every ache should be answered. Because some connections, they're only sacred when left incomplete. I don't hate him, and I don't hate myself, but I do understand now some moments aren't meant to become stories. They're meant to stay unfinished. A lesson, a scar, a breath you hold but never exhale. And maybe that's okay. Be careful who you try to save, because sometimes in the process, you lose pieces of yourself you didn't even know were still healing.